Pleasure to meet with you guys. The BodyMetrics system is really easy to use. There's a few things that you want to be dialed in on, which I'll discuss. I'm going to cover various case scenarios that may occur during your assessments with your athletes. But without further ado, I'm just going to jump in. So you both can see my screen in the application, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. So when we open up the software, the first thing that you're going to want to do, and you can do this at your leisure really, is navigate up here to File at the top left and just click on File and then scroll down to Preferences. The password is just 123. If you want to change that password at any point, you can do so here. The 123 works, and then we'll click OK. I just need you to make sure that you have a check mark both in the Show Names box here. Probably looks like that. You just click inside that box. And also this Enable BX button press box, okay? And once those are checked, we'll click OK and we're good to go. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is create a student athlete profile. Now you're going to notice on our homepage here, we have an icon where we can create a profile. This middle icon is where we can open up existing profiles to look at saved data or perhaps for reassessing your athlete. And then we also have this demonstration mode. And I'm going to speak to these in more depth as we go. But you're going to want to create a profile initially. When we click that icon, basic data entry, guys, we're just going to plug in first name and last name. The email field is optional. I don't suspect that you're going to send a report directly to the student. So a lot of schools are tending to leave that blank. And then we get to birth date. The fastest and easiest way to use this is just to use that same format, but highlight that field and then type, as opposed to using the drop-down calendar here. A little bit cumbersome that way. We're in the United States, so we'll leave that setting as is, pounds and inches. And then you want to enter a weight and a height. Now the questions come up quite frequently. Can you create this profile beforehand and then at the date of assessment, enter the correct weight and height? The answer is yes. So, but you do need to enter some kind of a weight and height into those boxes. And then once you do that, we can go down here to gender. Notice these little caret drop downs. If we click on those, we can select accordingly. Okay, and then we get to athletic type. So I want to spend just a moment briefly. I'm going to expand on exactly how this particular setting affects our software a bit later. Your focus and your concentration is really on your athlete's excess abdominal fat. Most of your kids are going to fall into the default category, which simply means that visibly speaking, they are carrying some excess fat. Kids that I would tend to classify as lean, you're going to know it. This would certainly be applicable to your super flyweight kids, 110, 120 pounders soaking wet, right? They're really wiry, really thin. They just don't have a noticeable fold of fat. In a lot of cases, you also see some abdominal definition. Certainly that individual is going to fall into the lean category. I would say don't overthink it. Again, I'm going to show you how this setting affects the software. It's really specific to the abdominal measurement when we go to perform that. Okay? You feeling good?
Feeling good.
So far?
Yep.
All right. So then we get down to group here. And the idea with this, if you wanted to categorize athletes into a current year, for example, you can do that. You can scroll down and then just select new group and perhaps the name of your school in 2020 or just the year. That's an option. The other purpose for this is if you were an assessor that was working with multiple schools and you wanted to separate data, you could see I've got some mock high schools created here. You could just type in the name of that school, and then those kids we could pull up in a report later. Real simple. The initial visit note, I tend to leave blank, but you're welcome to put a note in there. At that point, we would click Save Profile. Any questions? Pretty straightforward. Nope. Okay. If you created a profile in real time and you click Save Client, it immediately brings us to this tab. Okay, up here at the top, you can see we've got our various tabs and functions within those tabs. We were just on our home screen up here at the top left. And when we click Save Client, we're ready to roll. If you pre-populated the data beforehand, okay, and created a profile, when you open it, you want to definitely make sure that you've got the correct weight. We'll just input that here in this field box. And to the right of that, you can see we've got our height, okay? Still doing a urine-specific gravity test, right, this year?
Yes.
Okay, if you did want to insert the value, you could do so here. Completely optional. It doesn't have any bearing on the results. You did want to track changes with that value in the Trends tab, which I'll talk about later. Okay, now I'm going to back up just a minute. Let's say you did pre-populate and create a profile. This middle icon is where we can open those existing profiles, okay? If we click on that, there's really two ways to do this. Now, notice if you click search, it's going to bring up a string of all the kids in your database, and you can just scroll through and then click on the string, and we can open up that profile. The other way, which I find is a bit easier, is simply to type in the last name. You could do first or last name. Last name might be better. And provided you only have one student with that name and we click search, we're in. Okay, so two different ways you can do that. I would write a heading, you might underline it, that says device technique at measurement site points. Device technique at measurement site points. And regarding device technique at measurement site points, there's 4 things that you really need to be dialed in on, okay? And number 1 is that you want the device at a 90-degree angle at these site points. Device should be at a 90-degree angle at your measurement site points. If it's tilted or pointed funny, that could cause fluctuation with the measurement signal. So you want to be cognizant that it's at a 90-degree angle, flush and perpendicular as much as possible. Number 2 is at any site point, there's an optimal area of movement. So I would write down optimal area of movement at site points should not exceed ½ an inch. If you think about these site points, over here at our left, you can see we've got a table with both our points and then our fat thickness values. And we have these illustrations that depict where you're going to place that device. So the red dot really coincides with the head of this device. What I mean by optimal area of movement doesn't exceed ½ an inch above or below that red dot. So it's really ½ an inch above and below our measurement site point. Optimal area of movement at site point does not exceed ½ an inch above or below. Now, unfortunately, guys, what I see people doing when they're making measurements, and I realize this isn't the tricep, I'm going to use it today because it looks similar to the illustration. The mistake people are making is they're using way too much movement through the site. You do have to move the device. You don't want to just hold it stationary, but I wouldn't exceed more than ½ an inch back and forth through the point. For the tricep, I like to use a vertical movement following that dotted line, if you will. For the scapula, I get better results if I go side to side here, which makes sense because otherwise you run the risk of hitting the tip of that shoulder blade bone. So the movement side to side. And it's also side to side with the umbilicus. So tricep, again, vertical, scap and waist would be side to side. Number 3, and this is an easy one. Firm pressure is okay at these site points is recommended and okay. It doesn't compress the fat layer that we're trying to measure. I think the confusions come in with in thinking about other ultrasound modalities, whether it's fetal monitoring, whether it's some of your therapeutic modalities. Those devices are sensitive to pressure. We recommend pressure, and you'll get a feel for it, really. You know, in other words, when you go to make these measurements, you're not just barely placing the device on the skin. Apply a little bit of pressure, and you're good. Last but not least, the optimal duration of the measurement, 3 to 4 seconds tops. Optimal duration of the measurement, 3 to 4 seconds tops. Okay, so I'm going to guide you through exactly how I do this, show you the most efficient way to do it, and you know, we'll talk about the second component that's going to ensure your success with accuracy with this thing. The first being those 4 things I had you write down. Okay, so if we go back to the home page, and I apologize, some of this is redundant. I just wanted to resonate and hopefully stick with you guys. Let's say we did create a profile already. We're going to come back here to open up that profile. We're going to type, you can either click search or you can just type in last name and click search. And then I want to make sure I've got a current weight, current height, the USG field's optional, and I'm ready to roll. So the first thing that I like to do is just highlight the first measurement site, okay? And I'm gonna apply a little bit of gel to the head of my device. I just use a couple of pumps typically. You don't need a whole lot. And I'm going to, you know, use that illustration as reference. Keep in mind, it's really over here. Without pressing the button, I'm gonna spread the gel at my tricep. And once I spread the gel, I'm gonna lift the device slightly off the skin, and I'm gonna use the button on the device to engage that measurement point button that you see on my screen there, that measure point. It allows you to be, you know, relatively hands-free with your student athlete rather than having to go back and forth to your keyboard and then manually clicking on this thing. Okay, so again, when I spread the gel, I'm going to lift the device slightly off the skin, click, click on the button. It's 2 clicks. It's a timing thing, so you have to get the cadence down. And then I'm going to go to my point, and using all 4 of those things that we talked about, I'm going to press the button, and I'm holding that button down the entire time, and I'm measuring through my sight point, not exceeding ½ an inch, 3 or 4 seconds, let go. At this point, I don't need to double click. I can just navigate while I'm on the skin right back to my start and just press and hold the button down. You can see the speed of it. It's not fast, just nice, smooth, and easy. And it's going to always ask you for a minimum of 2 measurements. In a typical scenario, if your technique is good, it will ask for 2 and then automatically kick you into the next site that you measure. Don't panic, guys, if it asks for more than 2. What ends up happening in that case is it kicks out the incongruent reading and takes the average of the 2 closest ones, provided they're really close, okay? So it's essentially a repeat of the same protocol. Now, between site points, I always add a little bit more gel to the device. That's fine. You may have enough gel existing on there, but I always add a little bit more. Really kind of the same thing. So if we envision this is the scapula, can't get behind my back, but we would go to the scapula site point, spread our gel. We're going to lift the device just slightly off the skin, click, click, go back to my point, press and hold the button down. Here, guys, it's a side-to-side reading. I'm going a little bit faster than 3 or 4 seconds, but I think you get the idea. We'll repeat that. It's just a nice, comfortable, fluid speed through the point, okay? And in this case, it asked for 2 readings. Now note, I'm not trying to toot my horn, but note that the measurements are super close together. We're talking like 0.3 of a millimeter. It's like trying to split a hair, just to show you the accuracy and repeatability, I guess, of the system. Then we get to the waist. So a couple of things, and I promised you I was going to tie in how lean and default affect this measurement. If you look at the illustration, it's slightly deceiving. It almost looks as if the device starting point is over here. You want to be mindful that it's really right next to the umbilicus. This clear part on your device is the transducer, which is emitting that signal, and that really corresponds with the red dot. So I would go really close to the belly button rather than over here. And again, just a repeat of that same process. I'll do the honors. And we'll spread our gel there. Again, guys, angle is really critical, particularly here. We're going to apply our gel, lift the device off the skin, click, click, go back to our point, press and hold the button down, good angle, firm pressure here, 3 or 4 seconds, let go. Repeat. Okay. And voila. So we've navigated through all of our sites, and you can see on the screen here below our points table and our fat thickness values, it gives us our wrestlers' percent body fat as well as their minimum wrestling weight. So we're halfway there. I mean, again, a lot of people that never schedule training, they don't perform this second step, and it's really imperative you do this next step. So I might write down on your notepad there, perform minor analysis with the site point ultrasound signal graphs. And I'll repeat that, it's a mouthful. You want to perform minor analysis with the site points ultrasound signal graph. So what do I mean by that? Well, we've navigated through, we've done our measuring. You want to go back to the first site that you measured and just highlight that and pull up our ultrasound signal graph here. You want to look at the graph here, and you just want to ensure that the software chose the fat muscle interface or peak. Guys, it's typically the first strong peak of the ultrasound signal. We see that that peak lines up with the apex with that red vertical line. Mm-hmm. So that's the fat muscle boundary, and that's really what you and I are looking for when we're analyzing this thing. Note that there's multiple peaks, kind of throughout the entire graph. The peaks, for your own info, they represent different changes or tissue boundaries. This one here is probably fascia, perhaps, could be a vein structure and so forth. This last one is a reflection off of the bone. We know that because we see the signal just kind of die off, tail off. I want to show you a couple of hypothetical situations here. I'll use the scapula as the next one, but there's no adjustments when looking at this tricep measurement that I need to do. We see that that first strong peak was selected. And it just takes a minute, guys, to do this. You go to SCAP, we see very similar analysis. Would you agree? Okay, so hypothetical. Let's pretend, I'm just going to move this peak. I just clicked on a different peak down the scale here. Let's pretend I'm your athlete and we just got done and we're analyzing these graphs. We look at the tricep, first strong peak was selected, we're good. We'll go to the next one. Right away, guys, this should be a red flag for a couple different reasons. Just visually speaking, when we look at the graph, we notice that that red vertical line is on a different peak. It didn't recognize for whatever reason, and a lot of times it's attributed to bad technique, okay? Not always, but a lot of times. So we would need to make an adjustment to this graph. The other thing, typically the tricep value and the scapula value, They're relatively close in proximity. There isn't a major gap like we see here. 5 to 15 is a huge difference, right? It might be 5 and 7 or 5 and 8 or 5 and 6, somewhere, in that neighborhood. When we look at this graph, the only thing we would need to do, and note that I didn't need to do it. I'm just saying if this occurs, you're going to know what to do. We just simply take our cursor and we move it to the apex of that peak and we click on it. Okay. And you'll see this dialog box. Are you sure you want to set it to 5.1? We're going to say yes. We're good to go. Okay. So we manually overrode that value that we see displayed in our fat thickness table over here. You're not going to have to struggle with this all the time and make constant adjustments, but hopefully you'll agree it really boils to just some common sense type of thinking, and even more so with this abdominal measurement. So same kind of thing here, really. We look at this graph and we do see, some smaller peaks in here. It's usually the first strong peak, and we see that the software recognizes it. So I'm good to go. I could, in theory, just exit out of this profile now and then open up a new one and start the next athlete. But I want to talk about a couple of different things I think that are going to be really helpful for you moving forward. Kids that are lean, okay, getting back to the lean and default. When you create a profile and you designate an athlete as lean, that's telling the software to look for a strong dominant peak somewhere on the extreme, maybe 2.5 to 3, between that and 10, which makes sense because kids, adults for that matter, that are lean in the abdomen, their fat is sub 10. The default setting simply tells the software to look for the first strong peak beyond 10. And in my case, it picked it out because people that have excess fat, trust me, they're going to be beyond 10 millimeters. I hope that provided a little bit more clarity as to, how lean and default affects this thing. At the end of the day, guys, lean and default really don't matter as long as you're analyzing this graph correctly. It just helps the software initially try to predict the correct peak within the graph. So this x-axis is our thickness depth. So one last hypothetical. We've analyzed the tricep, we've analyzed the scap, we're good to go in both those areas. We get to the waist and I'm your athlete. Right away, again, red flag, right? For two reasons. A, 5.5. I'd be a happy kid. But reality is, in my case, you know that Mr. Test here is certainly carrying excess fat. There's no way that he's, sub 10. So 5.5 smacks of somebody that's really lean. So you know right away, can't be. We know that we're looking for the first strong dominant peak beyond 10. Same thing we did before. We're just going to click on the apex of that and we're going to accept that value. We're good. Okay, very important that you don't negate that step. Anyway, that is your typical protocol. And in a lot of cases, you won't need to make any adjustments. But I wanted to show you what you need to do in the event that those scenarios come up. So again, pretty easy to use. Now, I want to give you a couple of other tips and then give you an outlier situation that came up with an assessor recently. And it's really more when you're considering an athlete that has excessive abdominal adipose here. They've got a roll. Those kids are probably going to exceed 25 on the scale. I like to use 25 as a good mental reference, and here's why. Let's just pretend for a moment that my peak was on that red vertical and my measurement was at 25. A 25 millimeter BodyMetrix measurement translates into an approximate 2-inch fold of fat, very similar to a caliper in that regard. Okay, and I'll repeat that for you. A 25 millimeter fat thickness value translates into a 2-inch fold of fat right here. Okay, it's really, if you did the math, 25 equals an inch approximately. We're measuring fat inside the body, but it translates to a 2-inch fold, or for lack of a better term, chunk. Certainly some of your heavyweight kids, your bigger kids, you can bet that they're probably going to be 25 and out on the scale, right? Okay, so here's the outlying scenario. I'm going to go ahead and move this peak back. We'll adjust it back to where it should be. Okay. All right. So I had an assessor call me and he said, hey, I've got this gentleman. He's 5'11 and 360, big kid. And he was having difficulty even getting a measurement on him. It asked for like 5 different readings. It tops out at 5. He finally was able to get a reading. So I want to talk about this outline case in the event that it comes up for you. So number one, he told me that because he had a protruding abdomen, it was hard to even get to the sight point and he wasn't quite sure what to do. You guys, Nick and Courtney, I have no doubt that you are phenomenal with your athletes and your kids. It's not going to be a big deal to ask for their help. Have them pull it up so you can get to the site and then take a measurement. Now, this assessor said the reading on this particular kid was at 43 millimeters. So again, if we think about our depth scale here, that made sense based on his description to me, not even seeing this gentleman. But the assessor wasn't 100% confident, and I understand. So I want to show you a solution, something that you can always do if you're just on the fence, you're not sure. You can always cross-reference a value by using our scan feature. So we have an imaging component, and I think you guys will find this to be pretty neat, actually. It's very definitive. You can't argue with it. All right. Let's say you weren't sure about a reading. Let's say I just wanted to cross-reference 17.3. I shouldn't need to do that. This is a pretty straightforward analysis here. But we can go and always render an image. So up here, we can click on our scan tab. Down here at the left, we can select an area. It's a little bit different than a measurement in that we're not going to be going side to side right here. We're actually going to be starting at the same point, but sliding the device in one fluid motion. Okay, so I'll do the honors. You can see up at the top, there's that enable scan button. Exact same thing as measure point in our one-dimensional measurements. So we can be hands-free as well performing the scan. So I'm going to just spread the gel here. My objective is to make sure the device slides real smooth and easy on the surface. And when I'm ready, I'm going to go to my sight point, lift the device off the skin, click, click. Good angle is important. Press the button, and I'm holding the button down the entire time. And I'm just sliding this device in one fluid motion. They take about 5 or 6 seconds, guys. Pretty easy. And that produces a 2D cross-sectional ultrasound image, very similar to an X-ray. So how do we interpret this? How can we cross-reference that measurement? Well, believe it or not, the thought process is virtually the same as our thought process with this 1D measurement, okay? We know that when we're looking for kids that have excess fat, we're looking for a strong signal beyond 10. The white signals in the image, guys, they're exactly the same thing as those peaks that we saw in the 1D measurement we just went over. Okay, so these white signals are the same as those peaks, and the only difference in the image is that our fat thickness depth, instead of being down here on this horizontal x-axis, it's now on this vertical y-axis. Make sense? Because we're actually peering inside the body, if you will. It's a cross-sectional image. So in terms of interpreting fat thickness with the image, my focus is right here on the very left-hand side. Why? We're starting that image at our sight point, and as soon as I press that button, we're really at the site point as the image renders right here, okay? So if all I wanted to do, for example, and I'm going to get back to that case with the assessor and his athlete, but if I just wanted to make sure I was at 17.3, same thought process. I'd start from the top. I'm looking for the first heavy band of signal beyond 10. And hopefully you'll both agree with me. It's right here. It's a very consistent band of signal as opposed to a dot or intermittent signal. Visually speaking, if we just look at the scale at a quick glance, we see this band is right around 17. You can see that there's a thickness to this band of signal. And if I wanted to really get super accurate with it, I can split the difference with my mouse, and I'll typically just come off the very left of that signal. And I can do a left click and drag all the way to the top. And you can see it measured at 17.3, right? Where did I measure in the traditional site point? I measured it at 17.3. Again, just to show you how accurate our system can be. Now, getting back to the outlier when you have a really large athlete. We know, number one, if we're thinking about this scale, that individual is definitely going to be exceeding 25 here. And with this particular assessor, he said the measurement came in at 43. Made complete sense. I had him render an image, and we discussed that image. And sure enough, this band was right in here. So for a moment, let's pretend that that band is down here. So this is what I proposed to him. We can identify that band, drag our cursor all the way to the top. Next to this value, there's a transfer measurement button. So we can actually take the value from the 2D image and stick it into our formula in our body comp tab. So if we click transfer measurement, scroll down, we want to put it in our waist value in our table and click save. Now if we go back to body comp, lo and behold, we've transferred that. And you can see that it actually moved that red line down to peak. And it was already on the peak in his case. He just wasn't confident about the value. Again, not a typical part of your protocol. Does all that make sense for you in terms of the process? So wanted to show you that. The scans, you can save them. Below this box here, there's a save scan button. And you can always pull them up in this last tab that we see up here at the top in our scan gallery. I don't suspect you're going to have to use this feature often, but if you wanted to keep the images, the nice thing about them, you can select a couple and then compare them. The objective here is to show tangible proof of change. If you had an athlete that was interested in losing fat there, you can utilize the scan very similar to the measurement that we have here in terms of interpretation. All right. So let's talk about data collection and reporting to Track Wrestling. So let's say, we completed this assessment. I gave you all kinds of different scenarios, but the typical protocol is using good technique. Typically, you'll get 2 measurements. You go back, you perform your analysis, just make sure the correct peak was selected. You can exit, we can start a new kid, okay? Now, let's say you get through all your kids and now you want their numeric data. And for you guys, it's just going to be percent body fat, height, and weight, I believe, very similar to what you were doing with Tanita. You're just going to obtain those values. But when you're done, you want to navigate up here to File and then click on Group Summary. And that's going to bring up a table with all your kids. Okay. Now, if you created a group, you would click on All Groups and then just find that group that you created. But initially, when you open it, whether you created a group or not, all your kids should populate into the spreadsheet. So we need to export that. Okay, so you have a working document. All you have to do is click Save Data to File. And I just put this file, this XML file, right on my desktop.
Okay.
So it's right here. So here's what you have to do. You got to open up Excel. And when you open up Excel, I just open up a blank workbook. And you're just going to drag this file into that first cell. And now we have a working document.
Okay, that's easy.
Yeah, it doesn't take long, but then, you've got a working spreadsheet with all your kids, all their info. So you can see the fields up here kind of going horizontally, percent fat, which is what you'll need, and then, height and weight, I think.
Okay.
And you'll plug those into Track. And then it's just file and then save as, right?
Okay.
However you want to save that doc. Now, let me go back to that profile. So just a couple of other things. You've been so patient. I can't thank you enough for your time. There's a couple places that data within an individual profile is saved. Because with our system, everything is done in real time. So tomorrow, if you opened up Mr. Test's profile, it's going to have a blank slate. You would see all zeros, and you're probably wondering, where's my data? So 2 places. Above high school wrestling, there's this drop down, and you can pull up any date that you've ever assessed this kid. You just select a date, and then you can actually pull up the graphs even and see. The other place it's saved is in trends. Okay, so if you're in an individual's profile, you click on trends, and the show data button is exactly the same thing really as save data button in group summary. If we click on that show data button, we would save data file. This is in the event that you have a coach, perhaps a team doctor. For some reason, you need to export an individual's data. You could do the same process that we just went through. You can see progress or regression with these graphics, weight and percent BF. Lower graphic are the site points that we measured, and those values changes, in those values. Pretty straightforward. You can mess around with the ranges.
Okay.
Those are the 2 places the data is saved. We talked about the scan, talked about scan gallery. Let's say you get through, it's a new year. Next year, you want to create a new group for 2021 or 2022, whatever. What you can do is recategorize each athlete into a group. So you do need to open up their profile, and then you're going to navigate up here to profile. Click modify, and we can just create a new group with a new year. We'll say 2025. You'd save the changes, and then so next year, when we go to file, group summary, we can pull up those folks in 2025. See, John's now in that group, but all your kids would be in there. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. I think we covered everything. I really do. I think that, at this point, it boils down to a little bit of practice. Before I let you go, there is this demo mode. It gives you an opportunity to kind of practice with it. You can change the age and stuff. You could either use the arrows, easier to highlight and type. Only goes up to 21. But I'll just show you real fast. You can do mock weight and height here, select gender, athletic type. So, you could play around with it. The only thing I didn't discuss is females. Are you going to have female wrestlers?
I honestly am not sure if we have any.
Okay. So the only difference with females, the technique, everything is the same, but we're only measuring 2 sites.
Okay.
I'm sure you probably already knew that.
Yeah.
Okay. Pretty simple. I think just practicing with it a little bit and using good technique, that analysis of the graphs that we talked about, you should be good. It was really a pleasure to work with you both today. Stay safe and be well, and take care.